Welcome to the Recommended Daily Value Podcast, your daily dose into the health and wellness world.
Welcome back to the Recommended Daily Value Podcast, where we dive into everything health, fitness, and nutrition related 5 days a week in 5 minutes or less. This podcast is brought to you by Umzu, and I'm your host, Tyler Woodward. If you're not already, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, because today we're reviewing Paul Saladino, aka Carnivore MD's book, The Carnivore Code. I honestly really enjoyed this book, and although I do not entirely agree with all the points, or at least the extremes he alludes to, it is very worth reading in my opinion. And honestly, I don't think Paul at this point would completely agree with his book either, as he's gone from being a pure keto carnivore guy to being animal-based, consuming lots of honey, raw milk, and lots of fruit. But in my opinion, his message still stands. To illustrate his message, I'm just going to read you a quick passage from his book. Welcome to the world of plants. When insects and animals decide to go munching on our green neighbors, plants can't run away but are verbally threaten them to defend themselves. They have faced this quandary since the beginning of their evolutionary history, about 470 million years ago. And over that time span, they've come up with a solution, creating extensive defense mechanisms both physically and chemically. Turns out, plants are pretty darn crafty. For a long time, they've been in a constant arms race with everything that wants to eat them. In order to protect themselves, they have managed to produce a variety of defense mechanisms as they evolved, many of which we are familiar with. Ever go hiking in the desert and accidentally bump into a cactus? Ever play in the woods and stumble into a patch of brambles? Ouch and double ouch. We are much less aware of the molecular mechanisms plants have evolved to defend themselves. However, and these chemical spikes can cause just as much harm as the spines in a cactus or the thorns on a rose bush. So if I were to sum up the message of his book, it's that plants are not ubiquitously good for us as we've been led to believe. There's a narrative being pushed today that everyone and their mother should be going plant-based and should be eating less meat, but they always fail to mention the downsides of consuming many plants, at least in certain quantities. Virtually every organism on the planet has evolved some mechanism to survive. For us animals, it's to fight or flee, developing speed, wings, muscles, claws, etc. For plants, it comes in the form of chemical warfare, largely at least. And while this argument is probably overused, specifically by the carnivore community, it gets the point across. I do believe that many plants that we are consuming today are intentionally filled with toxins that deter us from eating them. And we can either eat them as is and suffer the consequences, or go the extra mile and prepare the plants in specific ways to reduce the quantity of these toxins within them, which is largely where I and Paul's viewpoints diverge. But back to the book. The book starts off with the anthropological arguments of why humans evolved to eat meat. He mentions the expensive tissue hypothesis, which we've covered before, but it's basically the concept that as our brains grew, our guts shrank, enabling us to allocate more energy towards brain function and less towards digestion. He also mentions our extremely acidic stomach humans possess that allow us to easily break down meat and protects us from toxins in the meat. Saladino also goes into the decrease in height and brain size we've seen anthropologically over the last 10,000 years since switching to a primary agricultural-based society. Section 2 of the book is all about the negative aspects of plants that are so rarely spoken of. This mainly focuses on the anti-nutrient content of various plants, including things like lectins, anthocyanins, phytic acid or phytates, oxalates, oxalic acid, glucosinates, isoflavonoids, etc. Basically, these are all phytonutrients found in many plants in varying quantities that exert an effect on our body, whether positive or negative. Many of the anti-nutrients, like phytic acid and oxalates, form bonds with minerals in the plants, including calcium and magnesium. Since we cannot break down these chemicals, it prevents us from absorbing these nutrients in those plants. For instance, kale is packed with calcium, but it's also extremely high in oxalates, which impairs our ability to absorb said calcium. As a result, kale ends up being one of the worst plant sources as far as calcium goes. He also goes into many of the negative effects that certain plant chemicals have on the gut, thyroid, the kidneys, etc. Saladino also makes the case that many of the studies on the beneficial effects of fruit and vegetable consumption on longevity is skewed as a result of more healthy people eating more fruit and vegetables. Basically, his argument is that people that are healthy are more inclined to eat more healthy foods rather than junk food, but he disagrees with the consumption of these plants is what's causing their improved health and longevity. In the third section of the book, he addresses many of the modern-day myths surrounding plants as superfoods and the downfalls of eating meat, including saturated fat causes heart disease, red meat raising cholesterol levels, red meat shortening your lifespan and causing heart disease and cancer, the increased bioavailability of nutrients in animal foods compared to plant foods, and nutrients that are only found in animals that are vital to our health. And then lastly, that you need to eat fiber to have a healthy gut, which he just says you don't need to, which I don't inherently agree with, but That's my take. And then in the last section, he goes into how to set yourself up for success with a carnivore diet and troubleshooting common issues seen on the carnivore diet. Overall, while I am not an advocate for the carnivore diet, I do think this book can be very enlightening. As I said before, plants can be problematic, and assuming that they are the pinnacle of health foods that we can eat in endless amounts is ignoring our physiology. While I do think the carnivore diet is very useful and can be a useful diagnostic tool or something that you can use to test to see what foods are messing with you, I do not think it is the be-all end-all or the diet we should be eating, personally, in my experience and my research. And I think a lot of the problems that Saladino talks about and shoots in the FAQ at the end of the book can be solved with the integration of easily digestible carbs like fruits. Well, that's it for this episode. If you are looking to learn more about the issues with various plants as foods and the many benefits of eating meat, I do highly recommend you check out this book. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button and to share it with a friend. And remember, these opinions are my own, based on my own research and experiences, and is not medical advice. Till next time, be good.